My grandmother was 65 years old when I watched a billionaire CEO bow before her in a ballroom full of Seattle's most powerful people, and in that single moment, everything my family thought they knew about the woman they had treated like a servant for 15 years came crashing down around them. What happened that night exposed secrets that had been buried for decades and revealed that the old woman my aunts and uncles forced to scrub their floors and cook their meals was someone far more important than any of them would ever be. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because I made a choice that night that destroyed my relationship with most of my family, cost me my inheritance, and left me permanently estranged from people I had known my entire life. My grandmother's name was Dorothy Chin, though everyone in the family just called her Grandma or simply expected her to appear when they needed something. She moved in with my Aunt Rebecca 15 years ago, shortly after my grandfather died. Grandpa had handled all the finances during their marriage, and when he passed, the family discovered that his medical bills and funeral costs had drained most of their savings. Grandma was left with almost nothing except a small Social Security check each month. Aunt Rebecca, my mother's older sister, offered to take Grandma in. She lived in a big house in a wealthy suburb of Seattle, Washington, and she said there was plenty of room. She told the family she was being generous and selfless, taking on the burden of caring for an elderly parent, so the rest of us would not have to worry. Everyone praised Rebecca for her kindness and her sense of family duty. But Rebecca's generosity came with conditions that became clear within the first few weeks. Grandma was expected to earn her keep. Rebecca had 3 children, all teenagers at the time, and a husband who worked long hours at a tech company. Rebecca herself had a part-time job at a boutique clothing store, and she said she simply could not manage the household alone. Since Grandma was living there for free, it only made sense that she would help out with chores. Helping out turned into doing everything. Within 6 months, Grandma was responsible for all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry, and all the grocery shopping. She woke up at 5:30 every morning to prepare breakfast for Rebecca's family before the kids went to school. She packed their lunches with the specific foods each child preferred. She cleaned up after breakfast, then spent the rest of the morning doing laundry, vacuuming, dusting, and scrubbing bathrooms. In the afternoons, she prepared elaborate dinners that had to be ready exactly when Rebecca's husband got home from work. After dinner, she cleaned the kitchen while the rest of the family relaxed in front of the television. She ironed clothes, organized closets, and did whatever other tasks Rebecca assigned her. By the time she finished her work each night and went to bed in the small room off the kitchen that Rebecca had given her, she was exhausted. I was 20 years old when Grandma moved in with Aunt Rebecca, and I was away at college for most of that first year. When I came home for Thanksgiving, I was shocked by how much Grandma had aged in just 8 months. She looked tired and frail. Her hands trembled when she served us dinner, and I noticed she had lost weight. When I tried to talk to her, to ask how she was doing, Aunt Rebecca always interrupted with some task that needed Grandma's immediate attention. The rest of the family did not seem concerned. My mother, Rebecca's younger sister, thought it was a fair arrangement. She said Grandma needed a place to live, and Rebecca was providing that. Doing household chores in exchange for room and board seemed reasonable to her. My Uncle David, the youngest of the 3 siblings, rarely visited Grandma at all. He lived across the country in Boston and sent a card on her birthday each year, but otherwise had little involvement in her life. Over the next few years, the situation grew worse. Rebecca's demands became more extreme and more demeaning. She began treating Grandma not like a family member contributing to the household, but like paid help who could be ordered around and criticized constantly. If dinner was not perfectly prepared, Rebecca would make Grandma redo it. If the laundry was not folded exactly the way Rebecca liked, Grandma had to fold it all over again. If any surface in the house showed the slightest bit of dust, Rebecca would run her finger across it and show Grandma the dirt, then make her clean the entire room again. Rebecca's children learned to treat Grandma the same way. They left messes everywhere, knowing Grandma would clean them up. They demanded specific meals and snacks and threw tantrums if Grandma made something they did not like. They never said please or thank you. They treated their own grandmother like she was invisible, like she existed only to serve them. What made it all worse was that Rebecca controlled everything about Grandma's life. Grandma's small Social Security check was deposited directly into an account that Rebecca managed. Rebecca said she was taking care of Grandma's finances, making sure the money was used wisely, but Grandma never saw any of that money. She had to ask Rebecca for permission to buy anything, even basic necessities like shampoo or new shoes when her old ones wore out. Rebecca usually said no, claiming they could not afford it, even though Rebecca regularly bought expensive clothes and went on weekend trips with her friends. Grandma was not allowed to make phone calls without Rebecca's knowledge. Rebecca said it was her house and her phone line, and she needed to approve any calls. This meant Grandma could not talk privately to friends or other family members. Rebecca monitored everything, isolating Grandma from anyone who might question the arrangement. I tried to intervene several times. I was in my mid-20s by then, finished with college and working my first real job. I did not have much money, but I offered to help Grandma find her own small apartment. I said I would help pay her rent until she got on her feet. But Rebecca shut down the conversation immediately. She said I was being disrespectful and ungrateful. She said she had sacrificed everything to care for Grandma, and now I was trying to undermine her. She said if Grandma left her house, she would be homeless and destitute, and it would be my fault. Grandma refused my help. She pulled me aside one day and told me not to fight with Rebecca. She said she did not want to cause problems in the family. She said she was old and did not need much, and she could handle the work. She told me to focus on my own life and not worry about her. But I could see the sadness in her eyes, the resignation of someone who had given up hope that things would ever change. My mother sided with Rebecca completely. She said I was being dramatic and that Grandma was lucky to have a place to live. She said lots of elderly people lived with their children and contributed to the household. She could not see or refused to see that what was happening to Grandma was not a normal multi-generational living arrangement. It was exploitation and abuse. What none of us knew, what Grandma had never told any of us, was who she really was before she married my grandfather. We knew she had worked before having children, but she never talked about her career in any detail. She always deflected questions about her past, saying it was not important and that her real life began when she became a wife and mother. The truth was that Dorothy Chin had been a pioneer in computer programming in the late 1970s and early 1980s. She had earned a degree in mathematics from MIT at a time when very few women, and even fewer Asian American women, were studying advanced mathematics. After graduation, she had gone to work for a small tech startup in Silicon Valley that was developing some of the earliest personal computer software. Grandma had been one of the lead programmers on a project that created a revolutionary operating system component, something that made computers easier to use for average people who did not have technical training. Her work had been groundbreaking, and the software had been incorporated into systems that eventually became industry standards. She had been listed on several important patents, and her innovations had helped launch the personal computer revolution. But when she met my grandfather, a traditional man who believed wives should focus on home and family, she had left her career. They got married, moved to Seattle, and started a family. Grandma never went back to tech work. She spent the next 40 years raising children, keeping house, and supporting my grandfather's career in accounting. Her contributions to the computer industry were forgotten, at least by her family. We had no idea she had ever been anything other than a housewife and grandmother. The tech industry, however, had not forgotten her. The software she had helped create had become foundational to modern computing. The patents she was listed on had generated billions of dollars in licensing fees over the decades, and the people who had worked with her, the ones who had gone on to found major tech companies or become industry leaders, still remembered Dorothy Chin as one of the brightest minds of her generation. One of those people was Marcus Jang, the CEO of Novatech Industries, one of the largest software companies in the world. Marcus had been a young engineer at the same startup where Grandma worked. She had been his mentor, teaching him advanced programming techniques and helping him develop the problem-solving skills that had made him so successful. Marcus credited Grandma with launching his career, and he had tried several times over the years to find her and thank her properly. But she had disappeared from the tech world completely when she got married, and he had never been able to track her down. Everything came to a head on a Saturday evening in October. Rebecca's husband had been promoted to a senior vice president position at his tech company, and his employer was throwing a formal celebration dinner at a luxury hotel in downtown Seattle. It was a black tie event, and all the top executives from the company would be there, along with important clients and industry partners. Rebecca was thrilled about the event, seeing it as a chance to show off her status and make connections with powerful people. The problem was that Rebecca had scheduled the event for the same weekend that her usual cleaning service was unavailable. The house was going to be empty during the party, but Rebecca wanted to host a small after-party at her home for a few select guests. She needed the house to be absolutely perfect, and she did not trust that it would be clean enough if she did not supervise the work herself. So Rebecca made Grandma come to the hotel. She told Grandma to wear a simple black dress and white apron, making her look like service staff. Rebecca's plan was to have Grandma stay in a back room during the dinner, then bring her out afterward to help serve desserts and coffee to the guests who would be coming back to the house. Rebecca thought it would be impressive to have personal staff attending to guests, making her seem more sophisticated and wealthy. Grandma tried to refuse. She said she did not want to go to the hotel, that she would be uncomfortable at such a fancy event. But Rebecca insisted. She said if Grandma would not come, then maybe it was time to reconsider their living arrangement. The threat was clear: obey or be thrown out onto the street with nowhere to go. So Grandma agreed, and on that Saturday evening, she put on the black dress and apron that Rebecca had bought for her and rode to the hotel in the back seat of Rebecca's car. I found out about this plan 2 days before the event. My mother mentioned it casually during a phone call, talking about how clever Rebecca was to bring Grandma along to help. I was furious. I told my mother it was degrading and cruel to make Grandma work at a public event like she was hired help. My mother said I was overreacting, that Grandma had agreed to go, and that it was just for a few hours. I made a decision that night that changed everything. I called the hotel and bought a ticket to the event. It was expensive, $500 for a single seat, but I did not care. I was going to be there to support Grandma and to make sure Rebecca did not humiliate her in front of all those people. I did not tell anyone in my family I was coming. I wanted to see exactly what Rebecca had planned before I decided how to respond. The event was held in the hotel's grand ballroom. a massive space with crystal chandeliers and tall windows overlooking Puget Sound. There were round tables set up throughout the room, each one decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces. A stage at the front of the room had a podium and screens for presentations. There were at least 300 people in attendance, all dressed in expensive formal wear, all talking and laughing and drinking champagne. I arrived early and found a seat at a table near the back. I watched as guests filtered in, recognizing some of them from news articles and business magazines. These were the most powerful people in Seattle's tech industry, executives and investors and innovators. And somewhere in this crowd was my grandmother, hidden away in a back room, dressed like a servant. The dinner began with speeches from various company executives, talking about their successes and their vision for the future. Rebecca's husband gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support of his career. Rebecca sat beside him at a table near the front, beaming with pride, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Grandma's entire wardrobe. Rebecca's children were there too, looking bored and playing with their phones under the table. After the speeches, dinner was served by the hotel's catering staff. Multiple courses came out, each one more elaborate than the last. I barely tasted my food. I was too busy watching the doors, waiting to see when Rebecca would bring Grandma out and what she would make her do. It was during dessert that I finally saw her. A door at the side of the ballroom opened, and Grandma emerged carrying a tray of coffee cups. She looked small and frail in her black dress and white apron, her gray hair pulled back in a bun, her eyes downcast as she navigated between the tables. She moved slowly, carefully, trying not to spill anything or bump into the well-dressed guests who barely noticed her presence. I started to stand up, ready to go to her, but something stopped me. The main doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and a new group of people entered. There was a stir of excitement in the room as people recognized who had just arrived. Marcus Zhang, the CEO of Novatech Industries, had come to the event. He was not on the guest list originally, but he had apparently decided to stop by to congratulate Rebecca's husband, who had just signed a major contract with Novatech. Marcus was in his early 60s, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit. He was accompanied by several assistants and bodyguards. People immediately began approaching him, trying to introduce themselves or shake his hand. He was polite but distracted, scanning the room like he was looking for someone specific. And then he saw her. Grandma was at a table near the front, pouring coffee for a group of guests who were ignoring her completely, too busy talking about stock options and market trends. Marcus stopped mid-conversation with someone who was trying to pitch him a business idea. His eyes locked on Grandma, and his expression changed from polite interest to complete shock. He walked away from the person he had been talking to without excusing himself. He moved through the crowd quickly, his assistants hurrying to keep up with him. People tried to stop him to get his attention, but he ignored them all. He walked straight to the table where Grandma was pouring coffee, and he stopped right in front of her. Grandma looked up, probably expecting to be told she was doing something wrong or being too slow. When she saw Marcus Zhang standing there, her face went pale. The coffee pot in her hand trembled, and for a moment I thought she might drop it. Marcus gently took the pot from her hands and set it down on the table, and then, in front of 300 of Seattle's most important business people, Marcus Zhang bowed deeply before my grandmother. The room went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to see what was happening. Rebecca stood up from her table, confusion and alarm on her face. The guests at the table where Grandma had been serving coffee looked bewildered, unsure of what they were witnessing. Marcus straightened up and took both of Grandma's hands in his. His voice carried across the silent ballroom as he spoke to her, asking if she remembered him, saying her name with profound respect. Dorothy Chin, he called her, not Grandma or Mrs. Chin, but Dorothy Chin, like she was someone important, someone who mattered. Grandma's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, confirming that yes, she remembered him. She remembered working with him all those years ago. She remembered teaching him and mentoring him and believing in him when he was just a young engineer with big dreams. Marcus turned to address the entire ballroom. He asked for everyone's attention, and he got it immediately. He explained that he had just recognized someone he had been trying to find for over 30 years. He told the crowd that Dorothy Chin, the elderly woman they had just seen serving coffee, was one of the pioneers of modern computing. He described her innovations, her patents, her contributions to the software that had revolutionized the industry. He said that without her work, none of them would be where they were today. He said she had been his mentor and his inspiration. He said she had taught him everything he knew about elegant programming and creative problem solving. He said he owed his entire career to her guidance and her brilliance. And he said it was a disgrace that she was standing in this ballroom dressed like service staff instead of being honored as the legend she truly was. The impact of his words was immediate and devastating. People began pulling out their phones, searching for Dorothy Chin's name, finding articles and patents and references to her groundbreaking work from the early days of personal computing. Whispers spread through the crowd as people realized this was real, that the old woman in the apron was actually a forgotten pioneer who had helped build the foundation of the industry that had made them all wealthy. And then everyone turned to look at Rebecca. Marcus asked the room whose idea it had been to bring Dorothy Chin to this event and make her serve coffee. Someone pointed at Rebecca's table. Marcus walked over to where Rebecca sat, frozen in her chair, her face red with humiliation and panic. Marcus asked Rebecca how she knew Dorothy Chin. Rebecca stammered that Dorothy was her mother, that she lived with Rebecca and her family. Marcus asked if Rebecca knew about her mother's history in tech, about her contributions and her legacy. Rebecca shook her head, claiming she had no idea, that Grandma had never mentioned any of it. But Marcus did not believe her, and neither did anyone else in that room. It did not matter whether Rebecca had known about Grandma's past or not. What mattered was that she had brought her elderly mother to a formal event and made her work as a servant. What mattered was the black dress and white apron, the coffee pot and the subservient demeanor. What mattered was that Rebecca had humiliated her own mother in public, and now everyone knew it. Marcus announced that he was personally ensuring Dorothy Chin would never have to serve anyone ever again. He said he would be making arrangements for her care and comfort, and that she would finally receive the recognition she deserved. He said Novatech Industries would be honoring her at their next annual gala, and he invited everyone in the room to attend and celebrate one of the unsung heroes of their industry. The crowd erupted in applause. People stood up from their tables, clapping and cheering for Grandma, who stood there in her apron, looking overwhelmed and confused and relieved all at once. Marcus's assistants immediately surrounded her, offering her a chair and a glass of water, treating her with the care and respect she should have received all along. Rebecca tried to approach Grandma, tried to say something, but Marcus stepped between them. He asked Rebecca to please step back and give Dorothy some space. His tone was polite but firm, and his security team made it clear that Rebecca would not be getting close to Grandma again that evening. I finally moved from my table at the back of the room. I pushed through the crowd until I reached Grandma. When she saw me, she started crying in earnest. I hugged her tight, feeling how thin and fragile she had become, realizing how close we had come to losing her completely to Rebecca's cruelty and neglect. Marcus asked me who I was, and I explained that I was Dorothy's granddaughter. I told him I had been trying for years to help Grandma escape from Rebecca's house, but that the family had shut me down. I told him I was so grateful he had recognized her and intervened. Marcus said he wished he had found her sooner, but he promised that everything was going to change now. The rest of that evening was a blur. Marcus's assistants made arrangements for Grandma to be taken to a luxury suite in the hotel where she could rest and be away from Rebecca. Marcus himself stayed with us for over an hour, talking to Grandma about the old days, reminiscing about projects they had worked on together, asking about her life since she had left the industry. Grandma told him everything. She told him about leaving her career to get married, about spending 40 years as a housewife, about losing my grandfather and ending up dependent on Rebecca. She told him about the last 15 years of servitude, the control, the isolation, the constant work, and criticism. Marcus listened to every word, his expression growing darker and more angry as Grandma described what her life had been like. When Grandma finished her story, Marcus made a promise. He said he was going to fix this. He said he was going to make sure she was safe and independent and treated with the dignity she deserved. He said he had access to the best lawyers and financial advisors in the country, and they were all going to work on her behalf. That night, while Grandma slept in the hotel suite Marcus had provided, I made the decision that would fracture my family permanently. Marcus had offered to have his legal team review Grandma's situation, particularly Rebecca's control over her finances. I told him yes. I authorized his lawyers to investigate everything, to find out what had happened to Grandma's money over the past 15 years, and to take whatever legal action was necessary to protect her and hold Rebecca accountable. Now this is where I did something that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. I signed papers that night, giving Marcus's legal team permission to act on Grandma's behalf. I made the choice to expose Rebecca's treatment of Grandma to legal scrutiny, knowing it would destroy any chance of family reconciliation. I chose justice for Grandma over family peace, and I have never regretted it for a single moment. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Marcus's lawyers discovered that Rebecca had been stealing from Grandma for years. Grandma's Social Security checks, which should have been going to her own expenses, had been deposited into an account Rebecca controlled, and Rebecca had been using that money for her own purposes. Over 15 years, Rebecca had taken over $100,000 that rightfully belonged to Grandma. But that was not the worst of it. The lawyers also discovered that Grandma was entitled to patent royalties from her work in the early 80s. The software she had helped create was still being licensed, and as one of the inventors listed on the patents, she should have been receiving regular payments. These payments had been going to an old address, and when they went unclaimed, they had been held by the patent office. There was over $2 million in unclaimed royalties waiting for her. Rebecca had never told Grandma about any of this. It was unclear whether Rebecca had even known about the patent royalties, but she certainly should have helped Grandma track down any money she was entitled to. Instead, Rebecca had encouraged Grandma to believe she was destitute and completely dependent, all while stealing her Social Security income. The legal consequences for Rebecca were severe. Marcus's lawyers filed a civil suit against her for elder abuse and financial exploitation. The case was covered extensively in the local news, with reporters describing how a prominent family in Seattle's tech community had treated a pioneering computer programmer like a servant. Rebecca's reputation was destroyed. Her husband's career was damaged by the association. Her children became pariahs at their private school. My mother tried to defend Rebecca, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that Rebecca had made mistakes but had not meant any harm. When I refused to back down or convince Marcus's lawyers to drop the case, my mother cut me off completely. She said I had betrayed the family and that I was dead to her. My Uncle David, who finally paid attention to what was happening, sided with Rebecca as well. He said I was being vindictive and cruel, that I was destroying the family over money. But this was never about money. This was about dignity and justice and refusing to allow an elderly woman to be exploited by the people who should have loved and protected her. I lost my relationship with most of my family, but I gained something far more important. I helped give my grandmother her freedom and her identity back. Marcus was true to his word about everything. He arranged for Grandma to move into a beautiful assisted living facility, one where she had her own spacious apartment and access to whatever care and services she needed. He paid for everything, refusing to let Grandma use her own money for it. He said it was an honor to help her, and the least he could do for someone who had given him so much. He also made sure the tech industry finally recognized her contributions. 6 months after that night at the hotel, Novatech Industries held a special ceremony at their annual gala. Grandma was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and she gave a short speech about her work in the early days of computing. The speech was covered by major tech publications, and suddenly Dorothy Chin was no longer a forgotten pioneer. She was celebrated and remembered. Her name added to lists of important women in technology, her story told as an example of the invisible contributions that had shaped the industry. Grandma lived in that assisted living facility for 3 more years. They were the happiest years of her life since before she got married. She was finally free from work and criticism and control. She made friends with other residents. She took art classes and learned to paint. She attended lectures and concerts and enjoyed all the activities the facility offered. She was treated with respect and kindness by everyone around her. I visited her every week, sometimes twice a week. We would have lunch together in the facility's dining room, or I would bring her to my apartment for dinner. We talked about everything, about her life and my life, and all the years we had missed being close because Rebecca had kept us apart. She told me stories about working in Silicon Valley in the early days, about being one of the few women in a field dominated by men, about the excitement of building something new and revolutionary. She also told me she was proud of me for standing up to Rebecca. She said she knew it had cost me my relationship with my mother and the rest of the family, and she was sorry about that. But she was grateful that I had chosen her, that I had been willing to fight for her when no one else would. She said I had given her back her dignity, and that was worth more than all the money and recognition in the world. Marcus visited Grandma regularly, too. They remained close friends until the end of her life, talking about technology and innovation and the ways the industry had changed since their early days. Marcus often said that reconnecting with Dorothy Chin had been one of the most meaningful experiences of his life, and he credited her with reminding him why he had gotten into technology in the first place, to solve problems and help people, not just to make money. Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years after that night at the hotel. She was 68 years old. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including Marcus Zhang and many other figures from the tech industry. There were articles in major newspapers celebrating her life and her contributions. She died knowing she was valued and remembered, knowing she had mattered. Rebecca did not attend the funeral. I had made it clear she was not welcome. My mother did not attend either, still angry at me for what she saw as my betrayal of the family. My Uncle David sent flowers but did not come in person. The family fracture that began that night at the hotel never healed. I inherited a small portion of Grandma's estate, though she left most of her money to various charities supporting women in technology and programs for the elderly. She wanted her legacy to help other people who had been overlooked or exploited. The inheritance I received was not large, but it meant everything to me because it represented her love and gratitude. The money Rebecca had stolen was recovered through the civil suit and returned to Grandma's estate. Rebecca was forced to pay additional damages as well, which bankrupted her. She and her husband divorced a year after the scandal broke. Her children, now adults, have cut off contact with her. She lost everything: her reputation, her family, her comfortable life. It was a harsh justice, but it was justice nonetheless. I think about that night at the hotel often, about the moment Marcus Jang bowed before my grandmother and everything changed. It was the kind of dramatic reversal you see in movies, the moment when someone's hidden past is revealed and they are finally given the recognition they deserve. But it was also bittersweet because it came so late, after so many years of suffering and exploitation. Grandma should never have had to work as a servant for her own daughter. She should never have been controlled and isolated and made to feel worthless. She should have been honored and cherished by her family, treated with the respect her accomplishments and her age deserved. The fact that it took a powerful CEO recognizing her in a public setting to change her circumstances is both wonderful and tragic. I learned important lessons from Grandma's story. I learned that people can be forgotten and erased even when they have done extraordinary things. I learned that family members can be the worst abusers, hiding their cruelty behind claims of caregiving and duty. I learned that standing up for what is right sometimes means losing people you love and facing consequences that last forever. But I also learned that justice is possible even when it seems hopeless. I learned that there are good people in the world like Marcus Jang who will use their power to help others when given the chance. I learned that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity and identity, even if you are 65 years old and have been beaten down for years. The decision to help Marcus's lawyers investigate Rebecca was the easiest decision I ever made, even though it was also the most costly. I knew exactly what I was risking: my relationship with my mother, my place in the family, my inheritance from that side of the family. But I also knew that those things were worthless compared to giving Grandma a chance at freedom and justice. Some people have asked me if I regret losing my family over this. The answer is no. The family I lost was not worth keeping. They were people who allowed an elderly woman to be exploited and abused. They were people who valued appearances and money and family reputation over basic human decency. They were people who, when finally confronted with the truth of what had been done to Grandma, chose to defend the abuser rather than protect the victim. I have built a new family now, a chosen family of people who share my values and treat each other with respect. I'm close to some of my cousins who broke away from their parents when they learned the truth. I am close to friends who stood by me when my mother cut me off. And I was close to Grandma during her final years, which is the relationship that mattered most to me. The tech industry's recognition of Grandma's contributions has lasted beyond her death. There is now a scholarship in her name at MIT for women studying computer science. There is a memorial page on Novatech Industries' website honoring her as a pioneer and mentor. Her story is told in books and articles about the early days of personal computing, making sure she is remembered as one of the people who built the foundation of modern technology. Marcus Jang established an annual award in Grandma's name given to women who have made significant but under-recognized contributions to technology. The award comes with a substantial cash prize and public recognition at Novatech's annual gala. Marcus has said many times that honoring Dorothy Chin is one of his proudest achievements. and that he wishes he had found her sooner so she could have enjoyed more years of recognition and respect. Rebecca never apologized for what she did to Grandma, even after losing everything. Even after the truth came out publicly, she maintained that she had done nothing wrong. She claimed she had provided Grandma with a home and that Grandma had wanted to help with household tasks. She denied stealing money and claimed she had no idea Grandma was entitled to patent royalties. She portrayed herself as a victim of my vindictiveness and Marcus Zhang's interference. No one believed her. The evidence was too clear, the pattern too obvious. Rebecca had exploited her own mother for 15 years, had stolen her money, had controlled and isolated her, had made her work like a servant while pretending to be a generous caregiver. The facts spoke for themselves, and no amount of denial or self-justification could change them. I have been asked many times if I would have done anything differently. The answer is yes, I would have acted sooner. I would have found a way to help Grandma escape from Rebecca's house years earlier, even if it meant I had to take her in myself and struggle financially to support her. I regret that I did not push harder, that I let Rebecca and my mother intimidate me into backing down. I regret the years Grandma spent suffering that might have been prevented if I had been braver and more determined, but I am grateful for the years we did have after that night at the hotel. I am grateful that Grandma got to experience recognition and respect before she died. I am grateful that she got to live in comfort and freedom, got to pursue her interests and make friends, and enjoy her remaining time. I am grateful that the last chapter of her life was happy, even if it was too short. The story of what happened to my grandmother has been told and retold in various forms. It has been featured in articles about elder abuse, about women in technology, about corporate responsibility, and the power of recognition. People have used her story as an example of how easy it is to overlook and exploit vulnerable people, and how important it is to stand up for justice even when it costs you personally. I have spoken publicly about the experience a few times, always with the goal of encouraging others to look out for elderly family members and friends who might be in similar situations. Elder abuse is far more common than most people realize, and it often happens within families where it is hidden behind closed doors and protected by social pressure to keep family business private. If I could give advice to anyone who suspects an elderly person is being exploited or abused, it would be this: act on your suspicions. Do not wait. Do not assume someone else will handle it. Do not let family loyalty or fear of consequences stop you from doing what is right. The elderly person being harmed needs an advocate, and you might be the only one willing to fill that role. The weeks following that night at the hotel were some of the most difficult of my life. While Grandma recovered in the luxury suite Marcus had provided, adjusting to the idea that she would never have to go back to Rebecca's house, I had to face the reality of what my decision meant for the rest of my family. The news of what had happened at the gala spread quickly through Seattle's tech community and beyond. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon it was everywhere. A forgotten computer programming pioneer, forced to work as a servant by her own daughter, rescued by a billionaire CEO who recognized her at a public event. It was the kind of story that captured people's attention and sparked outrage. My phone started ringing constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Friends and acquaintances I had not spoken to in years reached out to express their shock and support, but the calls I dreaded most were from family members. My mother called me 3 times in the first 24 hours after the gala. I did not answer. I knew what she would say. She would try to convince me to stop Marcus's lawyers from investigating Rebecca. She would tell me I was overreacting and making things worse. She would accuse me of betraying the family and airing our private business in public. When I finally did speak to my mother, 2 days after the gala, the conversation went exactly as I had expected. She was furious. She said I had humiliated Rebecca in front of the entire Seattle business community. She said I had no right to authorize lawyers to investigate our family's private affairs. She said Rebecca had made mistakes, yes, but that she had been trying her best to care for Grandma under difficult circumstances. She said families were supposed to work things out privately, not drag each other through the courts and the media. I tried to explain to my mother what had really been happening to Grandma for the past 15 years. I described the endless work, the isolation, the stolen money, the constant criticism and control. I told her that what Rebecca had done was not caregiving. It was abuse. My mother did not want to hear it. She said I was exaggerating and being dramatic. She said Grandma had always been free to leave if she was unhappy. She said I was destroying our family over nothing. That was when I realized my mother genuinely believed what she was saying. She had convinced herself that the arrangement between Rebecca and Grandma was normal and acceptable. She had seen Grandma serving meals and cleaning houses and doing laundry for years, and she had never questioned it. She had witnessed Rebecca ordering Grandma around and criticizing her work, and she had dismissed it as normal household management. She had known that Rebecca controlled Grandma's finances, and she had thought it was responsible and helpful. My mother had seen everything, and she had seen nothing. She had looked at the situation and chosen to believe the version of reality that was most comfortable for her. Acknowledging the truth would have meant admitting that she had stood by for 15 years while her own mother was exploited and abused. It would have meant accepting that she had failed to protect someone who needed her help. It was easier for her to be angry at me than to face her own guilt and complicity. Uncle David called me from Boston 3 days after the gala. His reaction was different from my mother's, but equally frustrating. He was not angry. He was disappointed. He said he understood that Rebecca had handled things poorly, but he thought I was being too harsh. He said Rebecca was under a lot of stress, that raising 3 teenagers and managing a household was difficult, and that she had probably just lost perspective over the years. He said families should forgive each other and move forward, not pursue legal action that would destroy relationships permanently. I asked Uncle David if he had known that Rebecca was stealing Grandma's Social Security checks. He said he had not known the specifics of the financial arrangement, but he assumed Rebecca was using the money appropriately for Grandma's care. I asked him if he thought it was appropriate that Grandma had to sleep in a small room off the kitchen instead of having a proper bedroom. He said he had not really thought about it. I asked him if he had ever visited Grandma in the past 5 years. There was a long silence before he admitted he had not. Uncle David's problem was not that he had actively supported Rebecca's abuse of Grandma. His problem was that he had not cared enough to pay attention. He had lived across the country, focused on his own career and his own family, and he had assumed everything was fine. He had sent birthday cards and made occasional phone calls, and he had considered that sufficient involvement in his elderly mother's life. Now that the truth had come out, he wanted to minimize the damage and move on quickly. He wanted to believe that Rebecca had made understandable mistakes rather than committed deliberate abuse, because that version of events did not require him to examine his own failure to be there for Grandma. Rebecca's children, my cousins, had varied reactions to what had happened. The oldest, James, who was 28 at the time of the gala, initially defended his mother. He posted angry messages on social media about how the media was destroying his family with lies and exaggerations. He claimed that Grandma had been happy living with them and that she had enjoyed contributing to the household. He said I was jealous of his family's success and trying to profit from the situation by associating with Marcus Zhang, But James's attitude changed when Marcus's lawyers presented evidence of the financial exploitation. When he saw bank statements showing that his mother had been depositing Grandma's Social Security checks into her personal account and using the money for her own expenses, he could no longer deny what had happened. When he learned that there were $2 million in unclaimed patent royalties that his mother had never told Grandma about, he had to face the reality that his mother had deliberately kept Grandma in a state of false dependency. James stopped defending Rebecca publicly after that. He did not apologize to me or to Grandma, but he also stopped attacking us. He simply went silent. And I heard from other family members that he had moved to another city and cut off contact with his mother. The burden of knowing what his mother had done and knowing that he had lived in that house for years without questioning the treatment of his own grandmother was apparently too much for him to handle while maintaining a relationship with Rebecca. Rebecca's middle child, Emily, was 26 at the time of the gala. Her reaction was the most painful for me personally because we had been close when we were younger. Emily and I had spent summers together as children, and we had shared secrets and dreams the way young cousins do. But when she learned what had happened at the gala and that I had authorized the legal investigation of her mother, she was devastated. Emily called me crying, begging me to stop the lawyers from going after her mother. She said her family was falling apart, that her parents were fighting constantly, that her father was talking about divorce, that her younger sister was having panic attacks. She said I was destroying innocent people who had nothing to do with what had happened to Grandma. She said her mother had made mistakes, but punishment should fit the crime, and what I was doing was excessive and cruel. I tried to explain to Emily that I was not punishing anyone. I was simply ensuring that Grandma got justice and that Rebecca was held accountable for what she had done. I told Emily that her mother had stolen over $100,000 from Grandma and had hidden the existence of $2 million in patent royalties. I said that was not a mistake. That was theft and exploitation. Emily did not want to hear it. She said families were supposed to forgive each other and that I was choosing money over family relationships. That conversation with Emily broke my heart because I realized she genuinely could not see the situation clearly. She had grown up in that house watching Grandma work endlessly, and she had thought it was normal. She had seen her mother order Grandma around and criticize her constantly, and she had absorbed the belief that this was acceptable treatment of an elderly family member. She had been conditioned from a young age to see Grandma as someone who existed to serve their family, and she could not break free from that conditioning even when confronted with clear evidence of abuse. The youngest of Rebecca's children, Sarah, was 23 at the time of the gala. She was the only one of the three who eventually came to understand what had really happened. Sarah had moved out of Rebecca's house 2 years before the gala to attend college in another state. She had been away from the daily reality of Grandma's situation, and that distance gave her perspective that her siblings lacked. When Sarah learned about the financial exploitation and the stolen royalties, she was horrified. She called me several weeks after the gala and apologized. She said she had not understood how bad things were when she was living at home. She said she had thought Grandma wanted to help with household tasks and that her mother was taking care of Grandma's finances responsibly. She said now that she was older and had been away from home, she could see that what had been happening was wrong. Sarah asked if she could visit Grandma at the assisted living facility where Marcus had arranged for her to stay. I said I would ask Grandma, and Grandma agreed to see her. Sarah visited several times over the following months, and she and Grandma gradually rebuilt a relationship based on honesty and respect rather than exploitation and control. Sarah was the only one of Rebecca's children who made that effort, and Grandma appreciated it deeply. The legal proceedings against Rebecca moved forward steadily despite pressure from various family members to drop the case. Marcus's lawyers were thorough and professional. They gathered evidence of the financial exploitation, documenting every Social Security check that had been deposited into Rebecca's account over 15 years. They tracked down the unclaimed patent royalties and established that Grandma was legally entitled to that money. They interviewed neighbors and friends who had witnessed Rebecca's treatment of Grandma over the years. The case was strong, and Rebecca's own lawyers advised her to settle rather than go to trial. But Rebecca refused. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and that she would fight the charges. She hired an expensive law firm and prepared to defend herself in court. Her strategy was to portray herself as a devoted daughter who had taken on the difficult burden of caring for an elderly parent, and to paint me and Marcus Jang as outsiders who were interfering in family matters for our own gain. The trial, when it finally happened, was a public spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters and members of the tech community who had heard about the case. Rebecca took the stand and testified that she had provided Grandma with a comfortable home for 15 years. She said Grandma had wanted to contribute to the household by doing chores, and that she had simply allowed Grandma to help out in ways that gave her a sense of purpose. She said she had managed Grandma's finances because Grandma had requested her help and had trusted her to handle the money responsibly. Rebecca's testimony was calm and measured. She presented herself as a reasonable, caring daughter who had made her best effort under difficult circumstances. She cried when describing how hurtful it had been to have her motives questioned and her reputation destroyed. She said she had never known about the patent royalties because Grandma had never mentioned her work history, and that she could not be held responsible for failing to track down money she did not know existed. But Marcus's lawyers were prepared. They presented evidence that directly contradicted Rebecca's testimony. They showed that Rebecca had not simply managed Grandma's money responsibly, she had spent it on herself. They presented bank records showing purchases of designer clothes, expensive dinners, and luxury vacations, all paid for with money from the account where Grandma's Social Security checks were deposited. They showed that Rebecca had told Grandma there was no money available for basic necessities like new shoes or a winter coat, while simultaneously spending hundreds of dollars on herself. They presented testimony from neighbors who had seen Grandma working in the yard in the early morning cold, cleaning gutters and weeding gardens while Rebecca slept in. They presented testimony from Rebecca's own cleaning service, which Rebecca had hired monthly to do the same work that Grandma was doing daily, suggesting that Rebecca knew the work was too much for one person, but preferred to have Grandma do most of it for free rather than pay professionals. Most damaging of all, they presented evidence that Rebecca had known about Grandma's tech background and her potential entitlement to patent royalties. They found an old email from 5 years before the gala where someone had contacted Rebecca asking about Dorothy Chen's current contact information because there were unclaimed royalties from patents listed in her name. Rebecca had never responded to that email, and she had never mentioned it to Grandma. The existence of that email destroyed Rebecca's defense that she had been unaware of the potential money. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding in favor of Grandma. They awarded her the full amount of stolen Social Security payments, plus interest. They awarded her the unclaimed patent royalties, plus penalties for Rebecca's failure to inform her about the money. And they awarded substantial additional damages for elder abuse and financial exploitation. The total judgment against Rebecca was over $3 million. Rebecca did not have $3 million. Her husband had filed for divorce shortly after the trial began, and he had moved to protect his own assets from the judgment. The house where Grandma had lived and worked for 15 years had to be sold to pay part of the judgment. Rebecca's savings and retirement accounts were emptied. She filed for bankruptcy, but certain parts of the judgment could not be discharged in bankruptcy because they were related to fraud and intentional misconduct. Rebecca's financial ruin was complete and permanent. She went from living in a wealthy suburb in a large house with every comfort to living in a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city, working a retail job to pay her basic expenses. Her social circle disappeared. Her friends from the boutique where she had worked part-time stopped returning her calls. Her husband's colleagues and their wives, who had once invited her to parties and events, now avoided her completely. The fall from grace was swift and total, and I would be lying if I said I felt no satisfaction watching it happen. Rebecca had spent 15 years making Grandma's life miserable, and now she was experiencing a fraction of the fear and uncertainty and loss of control that Grandma had felt. But my satisfaction was tempered by sadness for what could have been. Rebecca could have been a loving daughter who genuinely cared for her elderly mother. She could have helped Grandma track down the royalties she was owed and celebrated her mother's accomplishments. She could have treated Grandma with dignity and respect. Instead, she had chosen cruelty and exploitation, and now she was paying the price. My relationship with my mother never recovered from the trial. She attended every day of the proceedings, sitting on Rebecca's side of the courtroom, glaring at me across the room. When the verdict was read and Rebecca was found liable for everything Marcus's lawyers had accused her of, my mother stood up and walked out without looking at me. She called me that evening and told me I was no longer her daughter. She said I had destroyed her family and that she would never forgive me. She said I was dead to her, and she hung up before I could respond. I have not spoken to my mother since that phone call. She blocked my number and blocked me on all social media. She moved to Boston to live near Uncle David, and they have apparently built a life there that does not include me. I heard from Sarah that my mother tells people she only has one daughter now, Rebecca, and that her other daughter died years ago. It is a strange kind of grief, mourning a relationship with someone who is still alive, but who has chosen to treat you as if you no longer exist. Uncle David maintained contact with me for several months after the trial, but his messages were always uncomfortable and strained. He would send occasional texts asking how I was doing, but he never mentioned Grandma or the trial or anything related to what had happened. It was as if he wanted to pretend that none of it had occurred. Eventually, even those messages stopped coming. I heard from Sarah that Uncle David had decided it was too difficult to maintain relationships with both sides of the family divide, and he had chosen my mother and Rebecca over me. The extended family split along predictable lines. My mother's friends and her side of the family almost universally supported Rebecca and cut me off. My father's side of the family, who had always been more distant, mostly stayed neutral and avoided getting involved. A few of my cousins on my father's side reached out privately to say they supported what I had done, but they asked me not to mention their support publicly because they did not want to get drawn into the conflict. The isolation was difficult. I had grown up with a large extended family, with regular gatherings and celebrations, and a sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. Suddenly, all of that was gone. Holidays became quiet and lonely. My birthday passed without calls or cards from people who had never forgotten it before. I was not invited to weddings or graduations or any of the family events that had once been central to my life, but I also discovered who my real friends were during this time. People I had known casually became close friends as they stepped forward to offer support. Co-workers invited me to their family gatherings so I would not spend holidays alone. Friends from college came to visit and reminded me that family is not just about blood relations. And most importantly, I had Grandma. Our relationship deepened during those 3 years after the trial, and she became not just my grandmother, but my closest friend and confidant. Grandma adjusted remarkably well to her new life in the assisted living facility. At first, she was hesitant and uncertain. She had spent 15 years being told what to do and when to do it, and suddenly she had complete freedom to structure her own days. She told me it felt strange not to have a list of chores waiting for her each morning. She said she would wake up at 5:30 out of habit, ready to start preparing breakfast for Rebecca's family, and then she would remember that she did not have to do that anymore. It took her several months to truly believe that the situation was permanent. She kept expecting someone to tell her it had all been a mistake, that she had to go back to Rebecca's house and resume her old life. She had nightmares about Rebecca showing up at the facility and demanding that she come home. But gradually, as the weeks and months passed and she remained safe and free, she began to relax and enjoy her new circumstances. The assisted living facility Marcus had chosen was beautiful and well run. Grandma had a spacious one-bedroom apartment with a full kitchen, a comfortable living room, and large windows overlooking a garden. She could cook for herself if she wanted to, or she could eat in the facility's dining room where meals were prepared by professional chefs. She had access to a fitness center, an art studio, a library, and numerous activities and classes. Grandma discovered talents and interests she had not had time to explore in decades. She took a watercolor painting class and found she had a natural gift for it. Her paintings of flowers and landscapes were delicate and beautiful, full of color and light. She joined a book club and rediscovered her love of reading. Working her way through novels and memoirs she had always wanted to read, but never had time for. She learned to play bridge and became part of a regular card game group that met 3 times a week. She made friends at the facility, other residents who treated her with kindness and respect. She told me stories about the people she met, their lives and families, and the wisdom they had gained over long years. She said it was wonderful to be around people who saw her as a person with her own interests and opinions, not as a servant or a burden. She said for the first time in 15 years, she felt like herself again. Marcus visited Grandma regularly, usually once every 2 or 3 weeks. He would take her out to lunch at nice restaurants, or they would sit in her apartment and talk for hours about technology and innovation and their memories of working together in the early days of computing. Marcus treated Grandma with profound respect and affection. He called her his most important teacher and said that everything he had accomplished in his career was built on the foundation she had given him. Marcus also made sure that Grandma's contributions to computer science were finally recognized by the wider world. He arranged for her to be interviewed by technology journalists and historians. He made sure her name was included in books and documentaries about the early days of personal computing. He established the scholarship at MIT in her name, ensuring that future generations of women in computer science would know about Dorothy Chin and her groundbreaking work. The annual award Marcus created in Grandma's name became one of the most prestigious honors in the technology industry. Each year, a woman who had made significant but under-recognized contributions to technology would receive the Dorothy Chin Award, along with a cash prize of $100,000 and public recognition at Novatech's gala. Grandma attended the first 2 award ceremonies and was deeply moved by the stories of the women being honored. She said it meant everything to her to know that her legacy would be helping other women receive the recognition they deserved. Grandma's health remained relatively stable during those 3 years after the trial. She had some of the normal ailments of aging: arthritis in her hands, occasional dizziness, hearing loss that required hearing aids. But overall, she was healthy and active for a woman in her late 60s. She walked in the gardens every day. She attended exercise classes designed for seniors. She took good care of herself because she finally had the time and resources to do so. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to authorize Margaret Zhang's legal team to investigate Rebecca and pursue justice for my grandmother, because this decision did not just expose family secrets. It cost me my relationship with my mother, turned half my extended family against me, and left our family so fractured that I have not spoken to my mother or uncle in over 6 years. And I am sure none of them will be inviting me to any family gatherings ever again.